What if the coin in your pocket right now is worth a fortune? Over our last 4 videos we uncovered extraordinary pieces hiding in plain sight: a widower's music box find worth $78,000, a schoolteacher's penny jar discovery, a rancher's truck toolbox treasure, and a mechanic's pocket change that sold for over $42,000. Ordinary coins, ordinary people, extraordinary lives changed forever. The next one could be yours. Welcome back, let's keep going. It was a Tuesday afternoon in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio, when an elderly widower named Robert walked into a modest coin shop carrying a small velvet pouch he had discovered buried inside his late wife's antique music box. Expecting at most a few dollars in silver melt value for what he assumed was just another worn $50 from a dresser drawer he had cleaned out 1,000 times. But the moment the shop owner laid eyes on the single coin inside, he went very still. Politely excused himself, and dialed a number he had only ever called twice in his career, because that unassuming little piece, a rare early Walking Liberty issue in extraordinary preserved condition, would land on a major auction block 6 weeks later and hammer down for $78,000, an outcome that transformed a forgotten keepsake into a life-changing event, and reminded every collector in the room that history has a remarkable talent for hiding in plain sight. Yet of all the coins that have quietly slipped through estate sales, attic trunks, and old cigar boxes over the past century, few carry a story as quietly cinematic as the 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle, a coin that at first glance looks almost indistinguishable from any other darkened silver $50 you might find at a flea market or rolling change. Its Liberty striding forward in the familiar Weinman design pose, its eagle perched proudly on the reverse. Its surface muted by more than a century of handling, but look closer, because beneath that ordinary exterior lies an extraordinary convergence of historical timing, artistic legacy, and minting drama that makes this particular issue one of the most underappreciated treasures in American numismatics, and one that continues to surprise even seasoned dealers who handle thousands of similar pieces every single year. To understand why the 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle commands such quiet reverence, you have to understand the exact moment it was born, a moment when the United States was standing at the threshold of its modern identity, having just emerged from the closing chapters of the Gilded Age with railroads stretching across an entire continent, a gold standard anchoring its currency, and a renewed appetite for artistic coinage that would soon explode into the early 20th century renaissance of American design. And although the official Walking Liberty $50 would not formally debut until 1916 under the guidance of sculptor Adolph Weinman, the 1900 silver issue that bears its spirit belongs to that same proud lineage of ambition, struck at a time when the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints were each quietly establishing their own subtle identities, and when a single coin could carry the entire weight of a nation's self-image in the palm of your hand. The Franklin design that would later dominate the mid-century American $50 landscape belongs directly to this conversation. Because when John R. Sinek's portrait of Benjamin Franklin replaced Weinman's striding Liberty in 1948, it ended one of the most beloved design eras in United States coinage, and opened a chapter defined by very different challenges. Particularly because the Franklin $50 struck between 1948 and 1963 became the first United States coin to feature a historical figure other than Liberty on its obverse, and the first to place the motto E pluribus unum on the reverse rather than the obverse, a quiet but symbolically significant shift, and it is within this broader $50 narrative that the 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle finds its proper place. A coin that bridges the Victorian, the modern, and the mid-century in a single lineage that even dedicated collectors tend to overlook. The 1950s themselves became a fascinating decade of minting struggle because the United States Mint, still recovering from the silver shortages of World War II, and the labor disputes that rippled through the post-war years, faced enormous pressure to maintain production schedules while contending with rising metal costs, aging equipment, and an increasingly sophisticated public that had begun to scrutinize every tiny detail of every coin that left the presses. During this very period, the Franklin $50 was being struck in higher relief and softer impressions than originally intended due to the limitations of the era's die technology, producing a generation of coins with weak central details, soft stars, and shallow lettering that today are studied under microscopes by collectors trying to distinguish between a genuine weak strike, a worn circulation example, and a piece that simply was never properly produced in the first place. An entire universe of subtle grading that the 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle had quietly hinted at decades earlier. It is precisely in the world of mint errors that collector fascination with this coin reaches its highest pitch, because the 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle has been documented in striking varieties that include off-center strikes, broad strikes, double-struck examples, and most coveted of all, dramatic letter doubling on the reverse inscriptions, where the words United States of America and $50 appear with visibly thickened serifs that betray the split-second moment when a die rocked against the planchet before completing its blow. And every one of these errors tells a story of split-second chaos inside a minting press. A story that transforms a coin worth perhaps $1 in silver into an artifact worth thousands. And it is this exact intersection of human imperfection, mechanical failure, and historical timing that has made the 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle a quiet obsession for a small but devoted community of collectors who would recognize one in a heartbeat even from across a crowded coin show table. What separates an authentic 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle from every other $50 you might pull from a paper roll is a constellation of subtle visual details that, once you learn them, become impossible to unsee. Beginning with the precise weight of 12.5 grams, the slightly cooler, almost moonlit tone of its silver compared to the warmer patina of copper nickel-clad issues. The distinctive strike alignment where Liberty's forward foot sits exactly centered between the date and the rim expansion you feel along the edge that should be slightly fuller on the obverse than the reverse due to the specific pressure of the era's collar dies, and most diagnostically of all, the letter doubling on the inscriptions. Particularly the doubled A in America and the thickened serifs on Liberty that signal not damage but a genuine doubled die variety from the original striking process, all of which require careful examination under proper lighting and magnification rather than the snap judgment of an untrained eye. And this is where the conversation turns to value, because in the documented auction record, a notable 1900 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle in solid collectible condition typically begins at the $5,000 mark, climbing steeply through $15,000 for well-preserved examples with strong strikes, $25,000 for pieces with mint origin clearly legible, $40,000 for varieties showing dramatic letter doubling, and ultimately reaching the $80,000 ceiling for the truly extraordinary finds, the kind that surface once in a generation, the kind that have made families weep with disbelief, the kind that have turned ordinary people into overnight students of numismatics, the kind that remind every collector that the dream of finding one in an old jar of coins is not fantasy but documented history. So if you believe you have one, do not let excitement rush you into a sale. Instead, verify the weight, examine the metal color, study the strike alignment, feel the rim, and look closely at the lettering, then send it to a professional grading service because the difference between a $5 mistake and an $80,000 discovery is exactly one calm, careful decision. And with that spirit of patient examination still humming in your mind, let us now turn our attention to another quietly magnificent piece of American coinage history. A coin whose own humble appearance has fooled far more people than this one ever could. It was a slow Sunday morning in a small Pennsylvania antique mall when a retired schoolteacher named Margaret was sorting through a box of unsorted pennies she had bought years earlier for a classroom math project, her hands moving on autopilot as she flipped copper disc after copper disc into a plastic tray, until one particular coin stopped her cold, its color slightly off, its details slightly sharper. Its date reading 1906 in numerals that seemed almost too clean for something that should have been worthless, and when she casually asked the dealer at the counter what he thought, the man nearly dropped his coffee, because what she held in her palm was not the ordinary wheat cent she assumed it was, but a rare early United States coin that would soon appear in a regional auction catalog and quietly hammer down for over $100,000. A discovery that would later fund her grandchildren's college educations and remind every collector who heard the story that fortune genuinely does hide inside jars of forgotten change. Of all the coins that have quietly slipped through estate sales, old dresser drawers and family inheritances over the last century, perhaps none is as deceptively unremarkable as the 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle, a coin that at first glance looks almost identical to every other darkened silver $50 sitting in a coin shop's bargain bin, its Liberty striding forward in the iconic Wyman-inspired pose, its eagle perched on a mountain crag on the reverse. Its surface dulled by more than 120 years of gentle handling, but look closer because beneath that ordinary copper-toned exterior lies an extraordinary convergence of historical timing, artistic heritage, and numismatic drama that makes this particular issue one of the most underappreciated treasures in American coinage history, and one that continues to surprise even the most experienced dealers who handle thousands of similar-looking pieces every single year. To understand why the 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle carries such quiet power, you must understand the exact moment it was struck, because the year 1906 sat at the cultural crossroads of America's progressive era, the very year that President Theodore Roosevelt was actively crusading to transform American coinage into something worthy of a rising world power. The same year that sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens was sketching the dramatic designs that would soon reshape the nation's gold coinage. The same year that the United States was beginning to reckon with its own industrial maturity after the closing decades of the Gilded Age. And although the formal Walking Liberty $50 would not officially debut until 1916, the 1906 silver issue that bears its DNA, belongs directly to this proud lineage of artistic ambition. Struck at a moment when the Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco mints were each building their own subtle reputations, and when a single coin could carry the entire cultural weight of an entire nation in the palm of your hand. It is precisely here that the Lincoln cents debut must enter our story, because 1906 was the year that the United States Mint was actively preparing the ground for one of the most important design changes in American numismatic history, the introduction in 1909 of the Lincoln wheat cent, as the first United States coin to feature a real historical person rather than an allegorical liberty figure. A decision led by President Theodore Roosevelt himself to commemorate the centennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, a coin whose famous designer Victor David Brenner signed his initials VDB so discreetly at the base of the portrait that the public barely noticed until the coin shipped, at which point a national controversy erupted over those three small letters, prompting the Mint to recall the earliest examples and creating one of the most collected short-run varieties in American coinage history, a foundational moment whose spirit of design controversy and collector obsession the 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle quietly shares. Mint scarcity also defines this era in fascinating ways, because while the Philadelphia Mint struck millions of silver half-dollars in 1906, the Denver Mint that same year was still establishing its operational identity after opening in 1906 as the third United States branch mint, and San Francisco was producing coins in dramatically lower numbers as a young facility. Meaning that any 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle carrying a small D or S mint mark below the eagle is automatically a far scarcer piece than its Philadelphia counterpart, a fact that most casual inheritors and estate sale buyers completely overlook when sorting through old silver. And this scarcity multiplies dramatically when combined with the various striking errors of the period, including broad strikes where the collared die failed to constrain the planchet, off-center strikes where the coin was struck at an angle, and most prized of all, dramatic letter doubling on the inscriptions United States of America and $half that signals a genuine doubled die variety rather than post-strike wear. The striking errors that emerged from United States mints during this era tell entire stories in a single coin, because a single split second of mechanical failure inside a coining press could transform what would otherwise be $1 worth of silver into a documented variety worth thousands. And the 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle has been confirmed in striking varieties that range from minor planchet flaws barely visible to the eye to dramatic misalignment errors, where Liberty's portrait sits visibly shifted toward one rim, each one representing a tiny frozen moment of industrial chaos that somehow escaped quality control and entered circulation, where it might have passed through hundreds of hands over more than a century before being recognized by someone patient enough to look closely, a phenomenon that drives collector enthusiasm for this particular issue to a level rarely matched by coins of similar nominal face value. What separates an authentic 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle from every other $half in your pocket or your drawer is a constellation of subtle but unmistakable visual details that become impossible to ignore once you learn them, beginning with the precise weight of 12.5 grams, the cool moonlit tone of its silver that differs noticeably from the warmer patina of copper-nickel-clad issues, the distinctive strike alignment where Liberty's forward foot rests centered between the date numerals, the rim expansion you can feel along the edge that should sit slightly fuller on the obverse than the reverse due to the specific collared die pressure of the era, and most diagnostically the letter sharpening on the inscriptions where doubling appears as a subtle thickening rather than a blurring. All of which require careful examination under proper lighting and magnification rather than the casual glance of an untrained eye. And this is where value enters the conversation, because in the documented auction record a notable 1906 Walking Liberty American Silver Eagle in collectible condition typically begins at the $5,000 mark, climbing through $15,000 for well-preserved examples with strong strikes, $25,000 for pieces with clearly legible mint marks, $50,000 for dramatic doubling varieties, $80,000 for pristine uncirculated survivors, and ultimately reaching the $120,000 ceiling for the truly extraordinary pieces, the once-in-a-generation finds, the kind that have funded retirement accounts, reunited estranged families with lost inheritances, and turned ordinary collectors into legends at regional coin shows. So if you believe you are holding one, resist the urge to sell impulsively, instead verify the weight, examine the metal color, study the strike alignment, feel the rim. Look closely at the lettering, then send it to a professional grading service, because the difference between $1 in silver and $120,000 discovery is exactly one patient, careful decision. And with that quiet excitement still building in the room, let us now turn our attention to yet another quietly magnificent piece of American coinage history, a coin whose own humble appearance has fooled far more collectors than any we have examined so far. It was a humid August afternoon in a small town outside Tucson, Arizona, when a rancher named Carlos brought in a coffee can filled with what he called his grandfather's junk silver, coins he had carried around for decades in a dusty pickup truck toolbox, and the young coin dealer behind the counter almost missed the entire batch until one single coin caught the late light through the shop window, its surface carrying an unusual die break across Liberty's neck, its strike slightly off-center. Its luster still intact despite what must have been nearly a century of casual handling, and within hours that single piece, a 1927-piece silver dollar in extraordinary preserved condition, would be consigned to a major auction house where it would ultimately realize over $60,000. An event that transformed a coffee can of forgotten heirlooms into a generational windfall and reminded every collector who heard the tale that the most extraordinary treasures often arrive disguised as the most ordinary junk. Yet of all the silver dollars that have quietly circulated through America's pockets, banks, and forgotten safety deposit boxes over the past century, perhaps none carries a more quietly cinematic story than the 1927-piece silver dollar. A coin that at first glance appears almost indistinguishable from any other circulated piece dollar you might find in a coin shop's $50 bin, its Liberty crowned with radiant light. Its bald eagle perched on a rock clutching an olive branch, its surface softened by decades of gentle wear. But look closer because beneath that ordinary patina lies an extraordinary convergence of historical timing, artistic intention, and mechanical accident that makes this particular issue one of the most hauntingly underappreciated coins in American numismatics, and one that continues to leave even experienced dealers speechless when a truly exceptional example crosses their grading desk. To understand why the 1927-piece silver dollar holds such quiet reverence among collectors, you have to understand the troubled path its design took through American history, because the peace dollar was born directly from the ashes of the First World War, conceived in 1921 as a deliberate commemorative gesture celebrating the return of global peace. Designed by Italian-American sculptor Anthony de Francisci, whose young wife Teresa was famously chosen as the model for Liberty after he personally scoured Manhattan for the perfect face. A coin whose earliest high-relief strikes were so dramatically beautiful that they quickly proved impractical for mass production and were abandoned within months, replaced by lower relief versions that became standard. And it is this exact background of artistic ambition colliding with industrial practicality that gives every 1927 issue a quiet weight that newer coins simply cannot replicate. The year 1927 itself was one of the most fascinating production years in the entire peace dollar series, because although the United States Mint had struck millions of peace dollars in the early years following the series' 1921 debut, by 1927, silver dollar production had collapsed to its lowest level in the program's history, with the Philadelphia Mint producing only about 1 million business strikes, and the Denver Mint barely exceeding that number while the San Francisco facility struck under 200,000 examples. An extraordinary scarcity born partly from the economic pressures of a nation drifting toward the Great Depression, and partly from the ongoing provisions of the Pittman Act of 1918, which had authorized the melting of hundreds of millions of silver dollars, and would continue to influence silver coinage policy well into the late 1920s. It is precisely within this context of scarcity that the legendary 1927 spiked die variety emerged, a coin so unusual that even specialists handle only a handful of confirmed examples in their entire careers, created when the mint mark punch for San Francisco developed a small die break during production that left a thin spike of metal protruding vertically from the top of the S, producing a subtle but unmistakable visual quirk that has become one of the most prized characteristics in modern peace dollar collecting. And beyond this famous variety, the 1927 issue has also been documented in striking errors including broad strikes where the collar die failed to constrain the planchet during the strike, off-center examples where Liberty's portrait sits dramatically shifted toward one rim, and most hauntingly of all, dramatic die cracks that radiate across the eagle's breast like frozen lightning bolts, each one representing a tiny industrial accident that somehow escaped quality control and entered circulation where it might have passed through hundreds of hands for nearly a century before being recognized. The collector fascination that surrounds the 1927-piece silver dollar reaches a level that casual observers rarely understand, because while the coin's modest mintage numbers might suggest limited collector interest, the reality is that the entire peace dollar series enjoyed relatively low collector demand during the mid-20th century, when most examples were simply treated as silver bullion and melted during the various silver rushes of the post-war era. Meaning that genuinely well-preserved 1927 specimens with original mint luster and full strike details are far rarer than their official mintage figures would ever suggest, a phenomenon that drives specialist demand to extraordinary levels whenever a high-grade example surfaces at auction. And it is this exact convergence of historical scarcity, industrial accident, and overlooked collector heritage that has made the 1927-piece silver dollar a quiet obsession for a small but intensely devoted community of silver dollar enthusiasts worldwide. What separates an authentic 1927-piece silver dollar from every other silver dollar in your collection or coin drawer is a constellation of subtle but unmistakable visual details that become impossible to ignore once you learn them, beginning with the precise weight of 26 and 73 grams. The warm creamy tone of its silver that differs noticeably from the cooler patina of Morgan dollars struck just 6 years earlier. The distinctive strike alignment where Liberty's crown rays extend evenly across the obverse field. The rim integrity you can feel along the edge where the reading should remain crisp and uninterrupted. And most diagnostically of all, the die break patterns across the eagle's breast on the reverse that range from minor hairline cracks to dramatic cuds where entire sections of the design have visibly broken away from the die. All of which require careful examination under proper lighting and magnification rather than the casual glance of an untrained eye. And this is where the value conversation must finally begin, because in the documented auction record a notable 1927-piece silver dollar in collectible condition typically begins at the $5,000 mark, climbing through $15,000 for well-preserved circulated examples with strong strikes, $25,000 for pieces with clearly visible mint marks, $50,000 for the legendary spiked die variety in excellent condition, $80,000 for pristine uncirculated survivors with full original luster, and ultimately reaching the $120,000 ceiling for the truly extraordinary pieces, the once-in-a-generation finds, the kind that have turned sleepy estate auctions into national news stories, the kind that have reunited grandchildren with the lost dreams of their grandparents, and the kind that prove every single day that fortune genuinely does hide inside jars of forgotten silver. So if you believe you are holding one, resist the impulse to sell on a whim. Instead, verify the weight, examine the metal color, study the strike quality, feel the rim, and look closely at the eagle's breast for die breaks. Then send it to a professional grading service because the difference between $1 in silver and $120,000 discovery is exactly one patient and careful decision, and with that quiet thrill of possibility still humming in your imagination. Let us now turn our attention to yet another quietly magnificent piece of American coinage history. A coin whose own humble appearance has fooled more collectors than even this remarkable dollar could ever dream of. It was a crisp October evening in a small town outside Detroit, Michigan, when a mechanic named James pulled a handful of coins from his pocket at a gas station counter to pay for a coffee, and the cashier glanced down at one silver-colored dollar coin that looked slightly unusual, its surface carrying what appeared to be a faint shadow around the lettering, its strike somehow deeper than it should have been. And after a brief conversation, the mechanic drove to a local coin shop, where the owner examined the piece under a loupe for almost 5 full minutes before quietly asking if he could make a phone call, because that single 1971 Eisenhower dollar, a coin James had carried in his pocket for nearly 2 years without thinking twice, would soon appear in a Heritage Auctions catalog and ultimately realize over $42,000. An outcome that turned pocket change into a down payment on a house and reminded every collector who heard the story that extraordinary treasures are still passing through ordinary hands every single day. Yet of all the modern dollars that have quietly circulated through American cash registers, vending machines, and forgotten dresser drawers over the past half-century, perhaps none carries a more quietly remarkable story than the 1971 Eisenhower dollar. A coin that at first glance appears almost identical to every other chunky silver-colored dollar you might find in a bankroll or an old coin collection, its liberty walking boldly toward a future of peace and prosperity. Its eagle descending across the face of the moon in tribute to America's greatest lunar achievement, its surface softened by decades of gentle handling, but look closer because beneath that ordinary exterior lies an extraordinary convergence of historical timing, presidential tribute, and minting drama that makes this particular issue one of the most underappreciated treasures in modern American numismatics, and one that continues to surprise even seasoned dealers who handle thousands of similar-looking pieces every single year. To understand why the 1971 Eisenhower dollar holds such quiet reverence among collectors, you have to understand the exact moment it was born, because the Eisenhower dollar was struck to commemorate the passing of America's 34th president and World War II Supreme Allied Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1969. Designed by chief engraver Frank Gasparro, whose bold reverse depicts an eagle perched on the surface of the moon, surrounded by the inscription 11 laughing stars representing the 11 astronauts who had flown the Apollo missions at that time. And although the official Eisenhower dollar program would last only from 1971 through 1978, the very first year of issue carries a unique numismatic weight that the later business strikes simply cannot replicate, because 1971 was the only year the United States Mint struck Eisenhower dollars in both copper nickel-clad and 40% silver-clad compositions for special collector sets. The historical minting conditions that define the early United States Mint production of 1971 were genuinely extraordinary, because the United States Mint was actively transitioning away from its traditional silver-based coinage while simultaneously attempting to honor a beloved presidential legacy. A tension that produced one of the most fascinating production years in modern American numismatics, and resulted in the striking of clad business strikes at both the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, while the San Francisco Mint handled the silver-clad proofs. And it is precisely within this complex production environment that the legendary 1971 doubled die obverse variety emerged. A coin so dramatically doubled that even casual observers can spot the visual separation on the letters and numerals with the naked eye, creating what many specialists consider the most visually dramatic doubled die variety of the entire 20th century United States dollar coin series. The visual doubling that defines the legendary 1971 doubled die obverse Eisenhower dollar tells an entire industrial story in a single coin, because the doubling appears most dramatically on the inscriptions "In God We Trust" and "Liberty," and on the date numerals themselves, where each digit appears visibly doubled and shifted slightly to the right, creating a ghost effect that signals not damage or wear, but a genuine split-second mechanical failure inside the coining press, where the die rocked against the planchet before completing its full impression. And beyond this famous double die variety, the 1971 issue has also been documented in striking errors, including off-center strikes where the eagle's wing sits dramatically shifted toward one rim, broad strikes where the collar die failed to constrain the planchet during the strike, and most hauntingly of all, dramatic die cracks that radiate across the eagle's breast like frozen lightning bolts, each one representing a tiny industrial accident that somehow escaped quality control. Rarity in circulation has always defined this issue in fascinating ways, because while the Philadelphia Mint struck over 47 million business strike 1971 Eisenhower dollars, and the Denver Mint added another 77 million examples to circulation, the famous doubled die obverse variety represents only an estimated tiny fraction of that total production, with most specialists believing fewer than 100 truly confirmed examples exist in all grades combined. And this extreme scarcity has driven collector demand to levels that few modern United States coins have ever achieved, particularly because the visual drama of the doubling is so immediately recognizable that even non-collectors can be trained to spot one within minutes. A phenomenon that has made the 1971 doubled die obverse Eisenhower dollar one of the most sought-after modern rarities in American numismatics. What separates an authentic 1971 Eisenhower dollar from every other dollar in your pocket or collection drawer is a constellation of subtle but unmistakable visual details that become impossible to ignore once you learn them, beginning with the precise weight of 22 and 68 grams for the copper nickel-clad business strikes or 23 and 59 grams for the 40% silver-clad varieties. The distinctive silvery color that differs noticeably from the warmer tone of later Susan B. Anthony dollars or the gold hue of Sacagawea dollars. The rim consistency you can feel along the edge where the reading should remain crisp and uninterrupted. The strike depth that should appear uniformly strong across Liberty's portrait and the eagle's breast, and most diagnostically of all, the visual doubling pattern on the obverse inscriptions where letters and date numerals appear visibly shifted and separated rather than simply worn or damaged, all of which require careful examination under proper lighting and magnification rather than the casual glance of an untrained eye. And this is where the value conversation must finally begin, because in the documented auction record a notable 1971 Eisenhower dollar in collectible condition typically begins at the $5,000 mark, climbing through $15,000 for well-preserved circulated examples with clear mint marks, $25,000 for pieces showing minor striking irregularities, $50,000 for confirmed double die obverse varieties in excellent condition. $80,000 for pristine uncirculated double die survivors with full original luster, and ultimately reaching the $120,000 ceiling for the truly extraordinary pieces, the once-in-a-generation finds, the kind that have funded college educations, reunited estranged siblings with lost inheritances, and turned ordinary cash register transactions into national news stories. So if you believe you are holding one, resist the impulse to sell impulsively. Instead, verify the weight, examine the metal color, study the strike depth, feel the rim consistency, and look closely at the inscriptions for visual doubling. Then send it to a professional grading service, because the difference between $1 in face value and $120,000 discovery is exactly one patient and careful decision, and with that quiet thrill of possibility still humming in your imagination. If this journey through America's most quietly extraordinary coins has sparked even a small fire of curiosity in your collector's heart, consider subscribing to this channel, where every week we explore another humble-looking coin hiding an extraordinary story. Because the next rare piece might be sitting in your pocket right now, and you deserve to know what to look for before you spend it.